Good morning. Welcome back. Happy Tuesday to all of you. As you can tell, if you are watching us on Rumble or on YouTube, we're back in the studio, back in the home office. Made it back from a week of traveling, being away. And of course, today we've got a couple things to chat about. I'll be honest with you, there's not too many crazy items to discuss today. Today might be a shorter episode. I don't know. We'll see where the conversation takes us. We're going to talk about a couple different things. First off, if you thought the government shutdown was going to drag on even longer, you might be right. I don't know. We might be on the verge of a settlement and a reopening of the government. So we'll get to that. We also need to talk about if you want to have a baby in 2025, you probably are part of a bigger issue, bigger problem, especially if you are white. So we'll get to why you are an issue in America if you're white wanting to have a baby. And on top of that, we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on in the economy and what needs to be addressed. That and much more coming up next. Welcome back to We the Future. All right, let's dive into a couple different items to discuss. First off, let's chat a little bit about what happened over the weekend while we were away and not doing a show. We have potentially a agreement or a resolution that has come to the table in regard to the government shutdown. So it was rumored, started Sunday morning, that there might be an agreement on the table, and then it was released officially yesterday morning, so Monday. Obviously, the shutdown started October 1st, so it made it all the way to, it's still happening, still going on. But on Monday, November 10th, United States Senate passed a compromise funding bill, so not a continuing resolution, which we'll kind of describe and explain the difference between the two, but passed a compromise funding bill. 60-40 was the vote count, which we've talked about before. 60 votes is what's needed in order to pass it, to reopen the government. So now here's kind of what happens. So that's what happened in the Senate. Now it has to go to the House of Representatives for a vote. And obviously they are expected to meet together and vote on this compromise funding bill this week. And then from there, it heads to the desk of our President Donald Trump for his signature and endorsement. So here's kind of a little bit of key elements to the compromise funding bill. Just kind of read them off to you guys. So there's some funding of federal agencies. Now, it's not funding continuously. This is just funding until January 30th of next year. So only for, give or take 90 days, right? It also includes full year appropriations or full year approved spending towards a couple of certain programs, which we'll get into in a second. And then finally, it ensures that any federal government workers that were furloughed will be back paid and make sure that they don't have to go through any mass layoffs, which is obviously a good thing if you're working for the government. And in my opinion, are essential, right? We like essential workers. We don't like dead weight. Importantly, this is kind of where we'll talk a lot about, because I always like to stir the pot. It didn't include any of what the Democrats wanted, right? Now, remember, go back in time to one of our very first episodes. We talked about why, in my opinion, the Democrats were even holding hostage the government, why they were shutting it down, why it took 15 different votes to finally get to the point where 8 Democrat senators voted for opening the government and coming to some sort of a resolution. So if you missed that episode, you can go back and watch it. Or I'll just tell you, in my opinion, the Democratic senators were holding the government hostage. They were holding it hostage for a couple different reasons. A, because they wanted to get past the elections that we had last week on Tuesday. They wanted to make sure that they had enough manipulation power or enough stronghold on the government. And they were able to, of course, as they did so eloquently, pump out the misinformation that the shutdown was all of the Republicans' faults, the fault of President Trump. And this was just a horrible representation of how it's a failed administration. So if they could do that, then they could move the needle on the elections and make sure that their constituents were able to get in and be elected, right? Which they were successfully able to do in majority of the races that happened last week. So now that that's, no longer an issue, yes, of course, 40 senators, including a couple Republicans, which, neither here nor there, they still voted against the compromising funding bill, but we were able to at least get 60 votes to open up the government right until the end of January next year. So this leads me to kind of a tangent, but pretty on par. This could only be kind of a temporary funding compromise bill. We could potentially see, come the end of January next year and the beginning of February, we could see another government shutdown, because all of the things that the Democrats were asking for, right? Like they were asking for, obviously, extension to the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, Obamacare is what it's more commonly known as. They were asking for extension for that. They were also asking for money to be allocated towards the healthcare costs for illegal immigrants. They were also asking for all of those programs in a bunch of different countries to be funded, so that, of course, like I've talked about before, there could be, cooking classes for male prostitutes in, whatever country that they need cooking classes in, because you got to cook when you're on the streets and on the corners being a hooker. So none of those were approved, right? Now, what the Republicans did promise to do was that come December, they would agree to sit back down and be able to at least hear out the Affordable Care Act points that the Democrats have and hear out why they wanted to at least improve or put more money towards and extend the Affordable Care Act as far as that goes. But it's not like it has to happen. But I think if you don't see that happen, you're obviously going to see a shutdown come January. So long story short, it's not fully good news, right? The government is still shut down. We still have to have the House of Representatives vote on it, which should go in the favor of moving towards reopening the government. And then, of course, it gets to the desk of Donald Trump and he'll sign it so that we can reopen the government and move on. So what I thought was pretty cool was Trump yesterday, he announced that any workers that are air traffic controllers, any of those workers that continued to work throughout the government shutdown and didn't take time off, but still showed up, even though they weren't getting paid, but they were promised, and of course, that they would be back paid after the government reopens. Any of those people that still showed up to work and still helped to run, of course, the air travel and the airports and make sure that everything ran smoothly and efficiently during the shutdown, Trump wants to immediately propose that they all get a bonus of $10,000, which I think is pretty cool, right? From somebody who traveled last week, took a couple different flights. It was kind of a madhouse, right? I had to fly into Chicago, which if there's any airports that I would ever, just as a tangent, tell you to avoid, it would be Atlanta, Georgia, if at all possible, Chicago, O'Hare, and then anything in California. But that's just because it's California. So flying into Chicago, it was a little bit crazy. It was crazy in the sense of it just was constantly busy. I didn't have any major delays. I talked to a couple of friends of mine that were traveling. They didn't have any crazy delays or cancellations. But of course, over the weekend, we saw, over 2,000 flights get canceled because of everything that was going on. So I think it's pretty cool that Trump wants to go ahead and propose that, and hopefully that actually goes through. So, of course, it's not finalized. Like I said, there's still going to be a little bit more details to come out. When they do come out, of course, we're going to have them on here so that we can celebrate successfully of the end of the longest government shutdown in history. So, good news coming soon. In other news, a couple more things that I wanted to talk to you about was if you're white and if you would like to have a baby, you're probably part of a bigger institutionalized problem. And so we probably need to discuss that. Now, I know I'm a white guy with 2 kids. So do I have the authority to speak on this? I do. Yeah. Am I a part of this problem? I don't know. You, the viewer, you tell me. But let's first show you what the hell I'm talking about so we can kind of, break this down and together share how stupid it is, in my opinion. So this is a tweet or an X. What do we say? We used to say this is a tweet. Obviously, that was with Twitter. What do we say now? Somebody comment, because I don't have an X account. I've got a long lost Twitter account out there. I don't know if they correlate with each other, and I still have an X account. I'm not going to log in because I probably just was tweeting some weird things in junior high and high school. But this X post was made. Maybe that's the proper terminology to use. This X post was made by The Economist, and they say the following, quote, with Trump and Vance in power, many pro-natalists, which are people who are pro having kids, believe this is the moment to jumpstart baby making. But some critics see pro-natalism as part of an insidious project to create a wider America. Now, let's just break this down, okay? First of all, the hell, right? If you want to have a baby, you're part of a greater problem. You're part of some conspiracy agenda to create a wider America. Now, first things first, America is predominantly white. I think the last statistic that I saw was like 70% of America is white people, or, like if we're talking about your nationality, you are white. Like, okay, all right, I guess we're going to add more. We're really pushing for 73%. Come on, people. If you're married and ready to take on the responsibility of a child, get to it. We got to get to 73% because that's part of our greater hidden agenda. But like, this is coming from the people that are pro abortion, that are pro killing babies because it's just more convenient for you. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me that you now want to shame those who want to have babies. Now, regardless of who's in power when, or who's president and vice president when you have the kids, like, to me, that doesn't matter. If that matters to you, okay, that's fine. But like, to me and my wife, that didn't matter, right? Like, our first son was born during the Biden administration. Our second son was born during this current Trump administration. So it's like, okay, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but sure. But you're part of the majority of people that are out there telling me and telling women that it's okay for you to just abort a baby because it's not convenient for you, like you're actively pushing the genocide of millions of babies due to an inconvenience or due to just the factor of like, yeah, it's my body, my choice. And then you're going to shame white people or just people in general for wanting to have kids. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we've already established I'm a conspiracy theorist, but like, call me crazy too. That's the problem. It's not the other way around. It's not like we're not going to look at this in terms of hypocrisy or the irony behind this. I don't know, right? Maybe I digress. But still, it baffles me that that's the conclusion that they come to, which, I mean, they're reaching like hard, really, really stretching to try to find something to post about. But like, that's the facts. For example, in New York City, a black baby has a lower chance of being born than they do being aborted. Like, they have a greater chance to be aborted than they do to actually be born and live, because people don't want to birth into poverty and have a life with a baby of poverty, which I think is horrible, right? Makes no sense. There's plenty of different ways that you can, get around getting pregnant, right? I mean, this is not one of those shows, so I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but head down aisle 8 of your local CVS or Walgreens and look for the, family planning little aisle tag. Might find some stuff in that little section that you want to browse or go over. Not too hard to figure out if you've got a couple brain cells. But I just think it's super ironic that the day and age that we live in is, if you want to have a baby, you are part of a problem because you're now somebody who is what was the terminology again? Pro-natalist, right? That this is the greatest time to jumpstart baby making. I mean, like you said, if you're in a proper relationship with somebody that you genuinely want to have a kid with, and it's a good idea, and you're both on the same page, like, yeah, sure, go have a baby. But whoever these some critics are that believe that pro-natalism is a part of an insidious project to create a whiter America, I've got 2 kids. I wasn't part of anything. I wasn't part of any insidious project. If I'm supposed to be, I missed the mating, guys. You sent the email, but it went to the spam box. Sorry, I wasn't there. So, I don't know. Just, it's absolutely, in my mind, it's just ironic. It's pretty crazy. But let's move on to a couple of other things that happened. So, look, I'll level with you guys. Economy 101. I took it during college. I liked it. Economics is cool. But when it got to like deeper economic classes, I didn't have to take them. Haven't taken them. Not going to take them. So like, go easy on me. But Trump over the weekend and on Monday announced that he is trying to now have a 50-year mortgage be a possibility. Now, if you saw that, hopefully you just read up on it and you just weren't like, oh yeah, 50 years sounds better than 30 years. Let's do it. That sounds great. Hopefully you dove a little bit deeper, because to me, once again, my opinion, my show, my opinion, right? Leave yours in the comment, please. But to me, there's a big problem going on with the economy of America. Now, some might say, well, the stock market's really good and it's up, and, although that's great, I think we're seeing a bigger issue. And from what I remember from the economics class that I took, we're kind of seeing right now, it's what's described as a K-shape shaped economy. Okay. So if you got the letter K, if you need to draw it out, go for it. But you have the letter K where it splits, right? You've got one line going up, one line going down. And when a K-shaped economy happens after an economic crisis, right? After something big that happens in your economy, you know, for worse or better, it doesn't matter. But after an economic crisis, that's what you see. And so with the K shape, the reason why, in my opinion, that's what we're in, is because on the top line, the line that's getting better or improving in an upward trend of your letter K, you have people who own assets, who own homes, who own stocks, who have a stable job, who have savings. Those people in this economy are really improving. Like they're doing really well. Stock market is up. They're super happy. They're having a lot of success. And so it's a good thing. On the other hand, though, and on the reverse line on your K, the one that's trending now downward, you have people who are renters, people who aren't working a stable job, people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And those people are really struggling, right? There was something last week near the tail end of the week where Walmart put out some post and Trump retweeted it and said, like, look, costs for Thanksgiving dinner are down. Like, this is a good thing. The economy is doing really well. But fact checkers went back and went through it and found that the price of a Thanksgiving meal plan or package from Walmart, although is cheaper this year than it was last year, it's because it had like 4 to 6 items less than the package had last year. So like, it's not really cheaper. It's cheaper because you took things out of like the shopping cart. So yeah, if you take something out of the shopping cart while you're checking out and stuff it with all of the like gum and candy bars and you don't buy that item, then yeah, it's probably going to be cheaper than it would be if you bought that item. So like, to me, this plays into a bunch of different problems that we're seeing, right? We're seeing people have really good success, which is a great sign because it shows that capitalism is a positive thing and people can have a really positive experience with capitalism. But on the reverse side, with those people who aren't experiencing those positive, happy moments in our current economy, it makes sense why those people, like people in New York City, are voting in socialist elected officials, right? Because those people are the ones that are worried about the economy. Those people are the ones that aren't having a really positive experience. And so those are going to be the ones that say like, yeah, you know what? I would love to try socialism out. Even if it's got like the slightest hint right now of communist society, I'll try it out, right? Who wouldn't want state-owned grocery stores where I can walk in and I don't have to worry about stuffing something that I can't afford back behind the Snickers and the Twix bars? I can just keep it in my shopping cart and away I go. Why wouldn't I try that out, right? Why wouldn't I vote somebody in that could promise me free rent or free housing or, free public transportation? Yeah, all of that sounds really good because right now it's really hard for me to pay my car payment. It's really hard to pay my insurance and for gas. Right? It's really hard for me to go to the grocery store each week and spend, for a family of 4, a couple $100s on groceries to make sure that your kids survive. Right? Like I live in Utah, like majority of you that are watching this. And I saw a statistic a couple weeks ago that said in the state of Utah for a family of 4 to live comfortably, you have to be making right around $200,000. Now that's with like 2 cars, a house, kids, all of the stuff that comes with that. But like, that's a lot of money, right? Gone are the days where you can make 75 to 80K and be like, yeah, I'm living a very happy, comfortable life, probably as a single adult, but not as like a family. And so the reason why I bring this up is we'll get to the mortgage part, but I think there's a really big problem going on in America right now with the economy. And I think this plays really well into or segues into the greater issue of why we're seeing so many young voters or younger demographic, myself included, right? Me being next month 29 years old, why we're seeing so many of the younger voters start to question President Trump and question the main Republican officials, right? The standard GOP. I think that's the main reason why we're seeing this happen, is because there's a disconnect between, all of these leaders that say, this is great, this is awesome, we're thriving, we're doing really well, and life is good under a Trump administration, which at the end of the day, I will agree to, right? Being under a Trump administration versus a Kamala Harris administration, I've never lived under that before, but based off of how great she is and eloquent with her speech, I don't really feel like I would have liked living under her administration, whether you could have even call it her administration, or, she would have been the second puppet put forth by the Democratic Party. I'm getting down a road, but I'll go back to my original point. I think that's why we're seeing so many people move away from the party officials that are, saying, the economy's great and we're doing really well and you should be happy with what's going on and you should be supporting everything that Trump's doing. Well, it's not great if it's really hard to afford a house, to buy a house, right? I bought a house, my wife and I did last year, literally like a week ago last year. First year of home ownership in America hasn't really been like the American dream. We've had so many different issues with the house, aside from having to cut grass every Saturday or rake leaves because you have millions of trees in your yard and it's the fall. But aside from that, you've got expenses that come up because your air conditioner breaks or because your kitchen floods. And now you have to, try to decide if you're working with your insurance and filing a claim within your first year of owning a home. And now you got to pay all your deductible. And, aside from all of that, I think that's why there's a disconnect. I think we're seeing a strong majority of the younger population say, you know what? Although we really like and we voted for Trump to be in office, we're really questioning why it's really hard for us to make ends meet, to get out from renting and owning a house, and to make enough money that we can live off of and not have to live paycheck to paycheck or take on more credit card debt or more, debt in general. So all of that leads, me back to the original point of, I think that's why there's so many people that are now looking away from these Republican, voices that we've listened to for years. It's because they are missing the point. And in my opinion, if Trump and the Republican officials that are in his office and in his cabinet, if they don't do something to address the current state of the economy, especially for younger Americans, they're going to have a bigger problem on their hands. Now, I don't say that in the sense of there's going to be dissent and there's going to be, moving away from the party and we're going to have, Democrat officials voted in. But I think you're going to see more of what's happening in New York City with, the new mayor that they elected. I think you're going to see younger people start to question whether or not socialism is something that they do want or is something that is helpful or beneficial. So all of that to say, and to segue into, which is a very long way of segueing into, what came out this past weekend with Trump's plan to propose 50-year mortgages. Okay. So here's the idea behind it. Okay. The idea that Trump has is, if you have a 50-year mortgage, it lowers your monthly payment so that more people can afford homes. Okay, cool. Here's the reality, right? If you lower your monthly payment and you have a longer time to pay your payment or pay the entirety of the life of the loan, you're going to be paying the bank or whoever your mortgage is through, you're going to be paying them way more, if not double, what the house costs in interest. So statistically, here's the math equation, right? You have a house that's worth $415,000 that you buy. You purchase it at an interest rate of 6.34%. A 30-year mortgage, you would pay a total for that house. You would pay $514,000 in total, including your interest, if you took 30 years to pay that. If you have a 50-year mortgage, your total payments, if you add them up over the life of 50 years, you will pay a total of, for that same $415,000 house, you will pay a total of $959,000 in total, which is almost double. You'd pay an extra on top of what the house is worth. You'd be paying an extra $445,000 in interest, which, no thanks. I'm good, right? I've already calculated as a homeowner how much I'm paying in interest if I just took the minimum payment each month over the next 30 years to make those payments. Like, it's sickening how much money you're giving for interest. But of course, like, to play the game of the American dream and be a homeowner, you eventually have to bite the bullet and just buy a house, right? But to me, the 50-year mortgage is not a solution. It's only going to help, and in my opinion, the real winners will only be the banks or the banking institutions. Now, I think Trump is meaning well when he comes out and says that he wants to try this out, because to me, it makes me feel like he's actually trying to solve something or trying to put something into place that would help young Americans. But I think the greater issue, if he wants to address it, is the fact that you have all of these big mega conglomerate corporations like BlackRock or Vanguard. They're going out and just buying so many, single family homes or just homes in general, and then turning around and renting them to the American people, which, if you want to look more into, we can obviously discuss it. If you have a renting society where there's so few or so small of the population own and everyone else, majority of them just rent, you're going to start getting into those deeper waters that we've talked about of socialism and communism, because those people can now control you. And if they want to just raise the rent, you don't have another option, because majority of the houses are either being held by Americans who aren't wanting to sell, or they're being bought up. And they're not just being bought out for asking price or a couple $1,000s more. Like, statistically speaking, last year, they were bought for like well above asking. So, of course, Americans who are trying to get out of homes, you're going to tell me that I can get $750,000 for my house that appraised for $500K? Yeah. Like, I will definitely take the $750,000 over somebody's offer of $505, right? So, 50-year mortgage may sound like a good thing. It may lower your monthly payment. It's going to extend the life of the loan by almost double. You're going to pay way more in interest. And the other thing too, which I'm not an expert on the housing market, I also think that you would see a increase in like the market price. I think you would start to see people going, okay, cool. If I have 50 years to pay off my mortgage, it also might mean that I can afford a more expensive house. And so you're going to see people then take advantage of that as sellers, then increase the overall price of their house, right? Their $415,000 home, they might try to sell it for $500K. And someone might buy that because they're still able to afford the monthly payment, because you've got a 50-year mortgage. So, things to think about, right? Things to think about. Now, overall, not a whole lot happened in the news cycle over the weekend. Of course, you saw more if you paid attention to it, of course. I do, because I like this. I like stirring the pot. I like diving deep into this. You saw more going on with the Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes debacle. You saw Mark Levin, who we've talked a little bit about, and Ben Shapiro. They've backed out of multiple interviews and conversations, some of them with Tucker Carlson and other platforms, because they don't want to go on those platforms and have conversations, which in my opinion, okay, sure. Like if that's really what you're going to stand for and stand by, you're not going to have conversations with people who platform anti-Semitism. Okay, fine. But at the end of the day, in an open free market, I feel like that's what like the people want, right? But a lot of people wanted the conversation between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. And then when it happened, then you've got people who are now like, well, I'm not just going to talk to them, or I'm not going to talk about them, or I'm not going to give them any attention because they're not worth it, because they're platforming, anti-Semitism. And it's just like, okay, this was your chance to stand up and really show us why we should believe in what you believe, but you went the other way. So there's that. All in all, there's not crazy things to discuss. So we're going to end it there. Hopefully on Thursday, we'll have a lot more to go over. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Please like, comment, subscribe. Anything that you can do to share the show or share episodes with people that you feel like would get any value out of them is greatly appreciated. Always looking for topics of conversation. So I've had a couple people message me and give me feedback and give me things that they'd like to hear discussed. I would love to hear from you. What do you want to talk about? I would love for us to get to the point where we could do some of these shows, or, maybe once a month live, and answer questions on air. I think that would be super cool. Of course, if engagement continues to increase and grow, we'll get to the point where we can have a couple people online with us. And then, of course, I would love if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel. We post all of these on YouTube and Rumble, which you can find the links to in the Instagram bio. We also then post just the audio on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so you can find us there. But please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you didn't like about today's show or any other shows. Leave me some questions, and I would love to hear from all of you. But, of course, as always, we appreciate you being here. Let's build a future that we can all be proud of, an America first future. I'm Bryce Wheeler, and thanks for listening to today's episode of We the Future. Take care.